Welcome to More Action, the podcast for entrepreneurs, business owners, and professionals. I'm your host, Shelly Bryan, and together we have candid conversations with industry leaders to uncover valuable wisdom and lessons learned. My hope is you use these lessons to intentionally take more action in business and life. I hope you share and enjoy. Well, I hope you are ready to have a little bit of fun today and get a little bit more into the mind of Shelly here, because I am going to take something that I do all the time and I'm going to spin it and show you how I think about it. But before I dive into that, I am going to share another review. I just got to say thank you so much for the, 10 seconds, 15 seconds it takes to hit 5 stars, leave that quick sentence and your thoughts. I absolutely love it. And I love sharing them on here. I can tell from these reviews, we are attracting all of the similar minded, different, but also people that are wanting to do more and take that more action. So if you haven't left a review, I'm going to ask you, please do, because it helps get the show out. This show is 100% word of mouth. I'm not taking any commercials or anything like that. So I really appreciate you. But G. Vandergrift wrote, must listen. Great podcast and love the rebrand. As a local Scottsdale female business owner, also looking to be healthy and happy as a mom, I love this podcast. Can't wait to keep listening. G, I'm just going to call you G. Thank you so much for leaving that. I have some really great episodes coming up for that because we're hitting summer. So health is definitely a big part of it, but it's not even just for the physical look. It's actually a great way to increase your revenue, increase your income. And I'll share more on that to come. But I want to get back to today's fun episode. All the episodes here are fun. Let's be honest. But this one, I want to talk about a show that I recently watched and I binge watched. I'm not a Netflix person. I'm not really a TV person. I just don't have enough time. And if I sit still, I pass out because I'm so busy. That being said, this one caught my eye and I really hit it because I was like, what is it that is making me so interested in this show? And there's a few things I'm going to talk about. But one of the things that I do, that I'm your friend that will walk into a restaurant, watch a show like I'm going to share today, a movie, have a conversation with someone, and I already start trying to understand it at a deeper level. Whether it's taking it apart to be okay, how can I apply this to my life or to our business or to our family? Or what can I learn from this? Or what do I want to learn not to do from this? And that's kind of where this episode comes into. But this is that Netflix show. So if you're a Netflixer, you're probably going to love this. But this is from Bridgerton. So Bridgerton is a show. It originally came out on Netflix in 2020. And there's been 2 seasons, and the 3rd season is actually due to come out here in May. So this is really timely. If you want to binge it like I did, yes, I did, on the treadmill and or the stair stepper, this is when I watched this show. So you can imagine the hours I got in, but hey, had some fun with it. But the show, to kind of put it in perspective for you, if you haven't watched this show, it's based in 1813 London. There are a bunch of different high class, high status, let's say, that time period families. This is definitely a romantic show. It's kind of brings back that whole love and scandal and romance, and it absolutely crushed it. Actually, according to Entertainment Weekly, within 28 days of it launching back in 2020, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but back in 2020 was the first season. In 28 days, it hit a record of 82 million households around the world. Now, with that 82 million, just to define it even further, 82 million households comprised of 82 million Netflix accounts that chose to watch at least 2 minutes of Bridgerton in that time period of the 28 days. So regardless, you cut that in half, right? 41 million people. I think it's much higher, but 41 million people, 82 million people watch this within the first 28 days. I think that is absolutely incredible. And when you start looking at that, watching the show, if you haven't, I do recommend it. It's a fun watch. It's a little raunchy at points, which I'll get into more, not just into why they did that, because I started researching, like, why did the show do so well compared to all the other shows that Netflix and other television stations are putting on? This is how my mind starts working, is I'm like, well, why did that one work? And it's like a few topics that I kind of started drawing conclusions from, and I could have like gone really deep into the business aspects of this show. And just to like talk about it, I should actually step back just a second more, because this show, like I said, there's multiple families in there, right? And they all start playing, different roles within the show, and who's against who and who's with who. And there's like all these different personalities, all these different relationships that are going on during this time frame. And it definitely hit a chord with the target market. And that target market is that unserved female market when it came to kind of that romantic love, scandal, like those romantic books. I haven't ever read one, I must admit that. But it definitely hit a chord with it. And it proved, right? Proof of concept. We talk about this, that this was a highly unserved market. So I started like researching even more, trying to understand, why is it? Is it the actors? Is it the storyline? What was it that made this such a success? Because I was like, I want to share this on the show here. And maybe there's a teaching moment for myself, because I'm always learning, that I can also share with you guys. And it's so funny because what I wanted to speak about today is not what you would typically think, because there are so many things that I could have come out with this. We could have talked about luck, right? Luck of launching a show in 2020, right? We know what 2020 was, when people were looking for a release. They were looking for their Prince Charming. They were looking for something to like release and actually be part of society and going out. So there's a little bit of luck when it comes to launching at different time frames. I think you cannot argue that. There are certain products that have done very well with that. That being said, this is a romance, and it's like ultimately a love story. And like I said earlier, is they knew their market. They took a chance on an underserved market, because there's lots of, the rom-com market does very well. It had a huge binge hit kind of in the 90s, and then it kind of pulled back when a little bit more action. Like there's so many different things when you look at this and start researching, because I wanted to understand what was going on. They also push the envelope, right? In your business, you can see throughout history, there are people and businesses and leaders and organizations that have pushed the envelope and done very well. I mean, like I could think of like Steve Jobs. I could think of sports players that push the envelope. What they did in this show is there were some very racy scenes that are not normal for television. Obviously, being on Netflix, it's a little bit different than like good old cable back in the day, but they definitely pushed the envelope. They also, brought together like family dynamics when you're in like basically fighting for attention. How about any of you guys right now that are in a corporate position with an organization or with a business? Are you fighting for attention at some point? Absolutely. So this one, they use families, and they have a queen who everyone is fighting for the queen's approval and who is the best. And so you have like, I could have brought this episode to talk about family or team dynamics. And when you're trying to keep everybody in a tiny box and have everybody look the same. We could talk about leadership and how different characters in this show display different leadership characteristics to be able to bring about the desired result, being the best in society at the end of the day. There were so many different things that we could have talked about with this show when it came to, tying business or career aspirations with this show. But it got me thinking about an entirely different phenomenon that I don't think we talk about it in different ways, but this one is we don't just call it for what it is. And that's keeping up with the Joneses. This show absolutely was all about keeping up with the Joneses, who had, like, throughout both seasons when I watched it, these are all high class families. They're literally keeping up with each other when it comes to everything. How does their house look? How many servants do they have? How many cooks do they have? How many maids do they have? What is their beauty? How does their clothes fit? They're always at the dressmaker. The jewels that they wear, the education or the training, right? They would always be like, oh, my daughter can sing this, or my daughter can play this piano. And of course, the romance. Who's a good match? Who's a good match for love? Who's a good match for society? Who's a good match for their name and their family carrying it on? And so you have that whole prince and princess thing, but all of it was about keeping up with the Joneses. And that is something that it was loud and clear in this show. And so much so that it actually, like, they go after each other. I talked about rivalries. They start going after each other and one-upping each other. I don't know if you've ever been around a one-upper, but that is probably the one thing that if you are that, I will run the other way. Now, of course, this show was like super entertaining, but what I loved is that it made me challenge myself to see if there are any areas where I might be playing that keeping up with the Joneses game. Because we see this on social media, right? Remember when it first came out and it was like everybody rented the fancy car and it was like no one ever owned the car, or maybe they leased the car, they leased the house, they leased everything, and they didn't have a dollar to their name. Like, it was about keeping up with the Joneses. It's such like a scary place to be. So what I started doing is I love it when I get challenged like that, because I'm like, okay, where am I keeping up with the Joneses, perhaps? Because that was what was apparent to me on the show. And so I looked internally, personally. I looked at my horses. I looked at the clothes. I looked at purchases I made. I looked at my marriage and made sure that my marriage is strong, not compared to anybody else. In my parenting, how do we parent? Chris's role versus my role, mother versus father, very, very different. And I looked at it personally. Am I playing that game of trying to keep up with the Joneses in any area personally? Then I took it to the next level, which was professionally. While our construction company is nearly 7 years old, it could still be considered a baby in the field of construction. There are so many legacy companies that we compete with on a daily basis that are 40 or 60 years old, started by grandparents and passed down through generations. First off, I think that's absolutely amazing. Yet on the other hand, I can sit here and tell you that, like, oftentimes I'm like, we can't compete with that. How are we going to do that? What do we need to do? You could start like making decisions where you're trying to compete a 7-year-old company with a 60-year-old company. It's very different. And so our decisions at 7 years old, a 7-year-old company, are very different than those of 60. We also have a lot less liabilities and or resources that we are paying for if you're that old of a company. So I always love when I look at that and I'm like, okay, keeping up with the Joneses, we're competing with them, but we're not keeping up with them. That's a good thing, because it actually gives us a competitive advantage. But one thing that I always love to do is think about, what were those companies doing when they were 7 years old, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old in this industry? What were they doing? And I like to stay grounded there. So I felt really good about not keeping up with the Joneses in the business, but it is very, very tempting. Now, the last area that I looked to make sure that I wasn't doing anything outside of trying to keep up with the Joneses was my mindset. And I looked at it like, am I holding myself to some unrealistic standard? And what is my unit of measurement for success? And so I started looking at it because my mindset, if you've been following me on social media or if you have been here on the show, I will 100% always bet on my mindset, and a way to grow it for my best skill behavior to be able to reach the next level. And so I wanted to make sure that I didn't have some unrealistic standard. And that can only be an unrealistic standard if you are comparing yourself to someone else. So I went through and I had to really dig deep on this one because I wanted to make sure that I am not comparing myself to anybody else. And that comes in personally, professionally, and ultimately the mindset, because you don't know what is going on in anyone else's life or mindset and or business and or any other area. So I share this experience because it's easy to fall into that comparison or that keeping up with the Joneses. I mean, social media, love it. I do. When you remember why it was originally created to connect people together. But man, I tell you what, remember, you're seeing like the best of the best of the best photos and everything looks great. And I just think that we often need those reminders just to even ourselves. And whether you're getting it here on the show today or not, is that the only person that you have to compare yourself to is who you were yesterday. That is it. And so if you find yourself in kind of this funk or this game that you're playing of keeping up with the Joneses, stop. Remember, it's you. You are the only one to compare yourself against. And so I can tell you without a doubt that I've been there. And I love doing these checks. And I love, like, obviously I needed to, because that's what I noticed on this show. That was one of my biggest takeaways from this show. And I know that Chris has been in this position too. We've talked about it. But I hope that this kind of brings you a fresh perspective and also shows you how you can use that fresh perspective even when you're watching a silly show. There are lessons to be learned everywhere. And it is so great when you start opening up your mind. There are opportunities everywhere to learn and to grow our mindset and to open our perspective and challenge some of our past beliefs. So I hope you had a little fun here. This is like my mind all the time. I look at everything. I walk into a restaurant and I count the tables and I'm like curious what their average check is and how much money they're making. What is their average turnover with staff? Like, I just think about all these different things because I want to understand and learn from it. And so I took a show here on Netflix that was highly successful. I did some research. I could have broke down all these different topics that we could have talked about, relating it to business and or your career. But I wanted to always bring it back to your mindset. And the thing is that keeping up with the Joneses gets you nowhere. Making sure that you are comparing yourself, making yourself better than you were yesterday, that is where the real growth happens.